Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics translated by Robert C. Bartlett and Susan D. Collins' Book I Chapter 1 Every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action as well as choice, is held to aim at some good. Hence people have nobly declared that the good is that at which all things aim. But there appears to be a certain difference among the ends. Some ends are activities, others are certain works apart from the activities themselves, and in those cases in which there are certain ends apart from the actions, the works are naturally better than the activities. Now, since there are many actions, arts, and sciences, the ends too are many. Of medicine, the end is health; of shipbuilding, a ship; of generalship, victory; of household management, wealth. And in all things of this sort that fall under some one capacity, for just as bridle making and such other arts as concern equestrian gear fall under horsemanship, while this art and every action related to warfare fall under generalship, so in the same manner, some arts fall under one capacity, others under another. In all of them, the ends of the architectonic ones are more choice-worthy than all those that fall under them, for these latter are pursued for the sake of the former. And it makes no difference at all whether the ends of the actions are the activities themselves or something else apart from these, as in the sciences mentioned. Chapter TWO. If, therefore, there is some end of our actions that we wish for on account of itself, the rest being things we wish for on account of this end, and if we do not choose all things on account of something else, for in this way the process will go on infinitely such that the longing involved is empty and pointless, dearly this would be the good, that is, the best. And with a view to our life, then, is not the knowledge of this good of great weight, and would we not, like archers in possession of a target, better hit on what is needed? If this is so, then one must try to grasp, in outline at least, whatever it is and to which of the sciences or capacities it belongs. But it might be held to belong to the most authoritative and most architectonic one, and such appears to be the political art. For it or knowledge, in the strict sense, episteme, here in the plural. We use science, or scientific knowledge, to distinguish episteme from the other term Aristotle uses for knowledge, gnosis, or power, dunamis, here and throughout. This is the first instance of the term orexis, which we translate as longing, and which refers in general to the appetency of the soul, of which epithumia, desire, is a species. The term is related to the verb origin, which we translate as to long for, deigns what sciences there must be in cities and what kinds each person in turn must learn and up to what point. We also see that even the most honored capacities, for example, generalship, household management, rhetoric, fall under the political art, because it makes use of the remaining sciences and, further, because it legislates what one ought to do and what to abstain from. Its end would encompass those of the others, with the result that this would be the human good. For even if this is the same thing for an individual and a city, to secure and preserve the good of the city appears to be something greater and more complete, The good of the individual by himself is certainly desirable enough, but that of a nation and of cities is nobler and more divine. The inquiry, then, aims at these things, since it is a sort of political inquiry. Chapter 3. The inquiry would be adequately made if it should attain the clarity that accords with the subject matter. For one should not seek out precision in all arguments alike, just as one should not do so in the products of craftsmanship either. The noble things and the just things, which the political art examines, admit of much dispute and variability, such that they are held to exist by law alone and not by nature. And even the good things admit of some such variability on account of the harm that befalls many people as a result of them. It has happened that some have been destroyed on account of their wealth, others on account of their courage. It would certainly be desirable enough, then, if one who speaks about and on the basis of such things demonstrate the truth roughly and in outline, and I pound in speaking about and on the basis of things that are for the most part so, one draw conclusions of that sort as well. Indeed, in the same manner one must also accept each of the points being made. For it in Greek, science, art, or capacity are all grammatically possible. We will translate the word consistently by the political art. The ending "ike" generally indicates that an art, technique, is involved. Belongs to an educated person to seek out precision in each genus to the extent that the nature of the matter allows. To accept persuasive speech from a skilled mathematician appears comparable to demanding demonstrations from a skilled rhetorician. Each person judges nobly the things he knows, and of these he is a good judge. He is a good judge of a particular thing, therefore, if he has been educated with a view to it, but is a good judge simply if he has been educated about everything. Hence of the political art, a young person is not an appropriate student, for he is inexperienced in the actions pertaining to life, and the arguments are based on these actions and concern them. Further, because he is disposed to follow the passions, he will listen pointlessly and unprofitably, since the end involved is not knowledge but action. And it makes no difference at all whether he is young in age or immature in character. 14. The deficiency is not related to time but instead arises on account of living in accord with passion and pursuing each passion in turn. For to people of that sort, just as to those lacking self-restraint, 5. Knowledge is without benefit. But to those who fashion their longings in accord with reason and act accordingly, knowing about these things would be of great profit. About the student, and how one ought to accept what is being said, and what it is that we propose, let these things stand as a prelude. Chapter 4. Now, let us pick up again, and since all knowledge and every choice have some good as the object of their longing, let us state what it is that we say the political art aims at and what the highest of all the goods related to action is. As for its name, then, it is pretty much agreed on by most people. 12 Acrotes, literally, listener, or auditor, perhaps of spoken lectures, perhaps of such lessons as are conveyed by listening to the poets or to one's father, for example, consider one end and one end. For both the many and the refined say that it is happiness, and they suppose that living well and acting well are the same thing as being happy. But as for what happiness is, they disagree, and the many do not give a response similar to that of the wise. The former respond that it is something obvious and manifest, such as pleasure or wealth or honor, some saying it is one thing, others another. Often one and the same person responds differently, for when he is sick, it is health, when poor, wealth. And when they are aware of their own ignorance, they wonder at those who say something that is great and beyond them. Certain others, in addition, used to suppose that the good is something else, by itself, apart from these many good things, which is also the cause of their all being good. Now, to examine thoroughly all these opinions is perhaps rather pointless. Those opinions that are especially prevalent or are held to have a certain reason to them will suffice. But let it not escape our notice that there is a difference between the arguments that proceed from the principles and those that proceed to the principles. For Plato too used to raise this perplexity well and investigate it, whether the path is going from the principles or to the principles, just as on a racecourse one can proceed from the judges to the finish line or back again. One must begin from what is known, but this has a twofold meaning. There are things known to us, on the one hand, and things known simply, on the other. Perhaps it is necessary for us, at least, to begin from the things known to us. Hence he who will listen adequately to the noble things and the just things, and to the political things generally, must be brought up nobly by means of habituation. For that is a principle, and if this should be sufficiently ap times hoi polloi, literally, the many, or the majority, but in Greek as in English, the expression often carries a decidedly negative connotation. Parent, there will be no need of the why, in addition, and a person of the sort indicated has or would easily get hold of principles. As for him to whom neither of these is available, let him listen to the words of Hesiod. This one is altogether best who himself understands all things, but good in his turn too is he who obeys one who speaks well. But he who neither himself understands nor, in listening to another, takes this to heart, he is a useless man. Chapter 5. Let us speak from the point where we digressed. For on the basis of the lives they lead, the many and crudest seem to suppose, not unreasonably, that the good and happiness are pleasure. And thus they cherish the life of enjoyment. For the especially prominent ways of life are three: the one just mentioned, the political, and, third, the contemplative. Now, in choosing a life of fatted cattle, the many appear altogether slavish, but they attain a hearing, because many people in positions of authority experience passions like those of Sardanapalus. The refined and active, on the other hand, choose honor, for this is pretty much the end of the political life. But it appears to be more superficial than what is being sought, for honor seems to reside more with those who bestow it than with him who receives it, and we divine that the good is something of one's own and a thing not easily taken away. Further, people seem to pursue honor so that they may be convinced that they themselves are good. At any rate, they seek to be honored by the prudent, among those to whom they are known, and for their virtue. It is clear, then, that in the case of these people at least, virtue is superior. Hesiod, Works and Days 293, 295–97. The line Aristotle omits is, reflecting on what is better subsequently and in the end. The term translated as good is not agathos but the more poetic esthlos. See also Book 2, N. 18. Heart is thumos, elsewhere rendered as spiritedness or spirit. And perhaps someone might in fact suppose that virtue is to a greater degree the ethical life, to be rather elite. For it seems to be possible for someone to possess virtue even while asleep or while being inactive throughout life and, in addition to these, while suffering badly and undergoing the greatest misfortunes. But no one would deem happy somebody living in this way, unless he were defending a thesis. But enough about these things. They have been spoken about adequately also in the circulated writings. Third is the contemplative life, about which we will make an investigation in what will follow. The money-making life is characterized by a certain constraint, and it is clear that wealth is not the good being sought, for it is a useful thing and for the sake of something else. Thus someone might suppose that the previously mentioned things are ends to a greater degree than is money, for at least they are cherished for their own sakes. But they do not appear to be ends either, and many arguments have been widely distributed in opposition to them. So let these things be dismissed. Chapter 6. As for the universal good, 9. Perhaps it is better to examine it and to go through the perplexities involved in the ways it is spoken of, although undertaking such an inquiry is arduous, because the men who introduced 8, the forms are dear. But perhaps it might be held to be better, and in fact to be obligatory, at least for the sake of preserving the truth, to do away with even one's own things, especially for those who are philosophers. For although both are dear, it is a pious thing to honor the truth first. Now, those who conveyed this opinion did not make ideal pertain to those cases in which they spoke of the prior and posterior, hence they did not set up an idea of numbers either. But the good is spoken of in relation to what something is, and in relation to what sort of thing it is, and as regards its relation to something, but that which is the thing in itself, that is, the being, is prior by nature to any relation it has, for this is like an offshoot and accident of the being. As a result, there would not be any common idea pertaining to these things. And further, the good is spoken of in as many ways as is the term is, for the good is spoken of in relation to what something is, for example, the God and interleast 3, as for what sort of thing something is, the good is spoken of as the virtues, As for how much something is, it is spoken of as the measured amount, in its relation to something, as what is useful, as regards time, as the opportune moment, as regards place, as the right location, and other things of this sort. Since all this is so, it is clear that the good would not be something common, universal, and one. For if that were the case, it would not be spoken of in all the categories but in one alone. And further, since there is a single science of things that pertain to a single idea, there would also be some single science of all the good things. But as things stand, there are many sciences even of things that fall under a single category. For example, the opportune moment. In war, it is gen bide, singular, eidos, a term closely associated with Plato or the Platonists. Like idea, the term that will shortly follow, the primary sense of eidos is that which is seen, in particular, the form or shape of a thing. In the Platonic doctrine of the forms, to which Aristotle refers here, the id are the self-subsisting forms that give each particular thing its class character and hence are in some sense responsible for the existence of as what is. Or, friends, philoi. Heraldship, in illness, medicine, and in the case of the measured amount of nourishment, on the one hand, it is medicine, but in that of physical exertion, perplexed as we mean by as such. In fact, the very state of human being pertains both to human being as such, and to a given human being. For in the respect in which each is a human being, they will differ at all. And if so, then neither the good as such nor a good thing will differ, in the respect in which each is good. Moreover, the good will not be good to a greater degree by being eternal either, if in fact whiteness that lasts a long time will not be whiter than that which lasts only a day. The Pythagoreans seem to speak more persuasively about it by positing the one in the column of the goods, and it is indeed they whom Speusippus seems to follow. But about these things let there be another argument. A certain dispute over the point stated begins to appear, because the arguments made, by the proponents of the forms, do not concern every good. Things pursued and cherished by themselves are spoken of in reference to a single form, but what produces these, or in some way preserves them or prevents their contraries, is spoken of as being good on account of the former sorts of goods and in a different manner. It is clear, then, that the good things would be spoken of in two senses, those that are good in themselves, others that are good on account of these. Separating the things good in themselves from those that are advantageous, then, let us examine whether the former are spoken of in reference to a single idea. What sorts of things might someone posit as being good in themselves? Is it so many things as are in fact pursued for themselves alone, for example, exercising prudence and seeing, as well as certain pleasures and honors? For even if we pursue these on account of something else as well, nonetheless one might posit them as being among the things that are good in themselves. Or is nothing good in itself except the idea? The result will be that the form, abstracted from all individual good things, is pointless. But if in fact these things, that is, exercising prudence, seeing, and the like, are among the things good in themselves, the little is known about Pythagoras, a famous thinker of the 6th century, hailing 35T096b definition of the good will need to manifest itself as the same in all cases, just as the definition of whiteness is the same in the case of snow and in that of white lead. But the definitions of honor, prudence, and pleasure are distinct and differ in the very respect in which they are goods. It is not the case, therefore, that the good is something common in reference to a single idea. But how indeed are they spoken of as good? For they are not like things that share the same name by chance. Is it by dint of their stemming from one thing, or because they all contribute to one thing? Or is it more that they are such by analogy? For as there is sight in the body, so there is intellect in the soul, and indeed one thing in one thing, another in another. But perhaps we ought to leave these considerations be precise about them would be more appropriate to another philosophy. The case is similar with the idea as well. Even if there is some one good thing that is predicated of things in, or there is itself, it is clear that capable of being a thing that is not. Perhaps someone might be of the opinion that it is better to be familiar with it, with a view to those goods that can be possessed and are subject to action. By having this universal good as a sort of model, we will to a greater degree know also the things that are good for us, and if we know them, we will hit on them. Now, the argument has a certain persuasiveness, but it seems to be inconsistent with the sciences. For although all sciences aim at some good and seek out what is lacking, they pass over knowledge of the good itself. And yet it is not reasonable for all craftsmen to be ignorant of so great an aid and not even to seek it out. A further perplexity too is what benefit the weaver or carpenter might gain, in relation to his own art, by knowing this same good, or how he who has contemplated the idea itself will be a more skilled physician or general. For it appears that the physician does not examine even health this way, but inquires rather into the health of a human being, and even more, perhaps, into that of this particular human being. For he treats patients individually. And let what pertains to these things be stated up to this point. Chapter 7. Let us go back again to the good being sought, whatever it might be. For it appears to be one thing in one action or art, another in another. It is 11 different thing in medicine and in generalship, and so on with the rest. What, then, is the good in each of these? Or is it that for the sake of which everything else is done? In medicine, this is health. in generalship, victory, in house building, a house, and in another, it would be something else. But in every action and choice, it is the end involved, since it is for the sake of this that all people do everything else. As a result, if there is some end of all actions, this would be the good related to action, and if there are several, then it would be these. So as the argument proceeds, it arrives at the same point. But one ought to try to make this clearer still. Since the ends appear to be several, and some of these we choose on account of something else, for example, wealth, and all those, and the instrumental things generally, it is clear that not all ends are complete. 7. But what is the best appears to be something complete. As a result, if there is some one thing that is complete in itself, this would be what is being sought, and if there are several, then the most complete of these. We say that what is sought out for itself is more complete than what is sought out on account of something else, and that what is never chosen on account of something else is more complete than those things chosen both for themselves and on account of this further end. The simply complete thing, then, is that which is always chosen for itself and never on account of something else. Happiness above all seems to be of this character, for we always choose it on account of itself and never on account of something else. Yet honor, pleasure, intellect, and every virtue we choose on their own account, for even if nothing resulted from them, we would choose each of them, but we choose them also for the sake of happiness, because we suppose that, through them, we will be happy. But nobody chooses happiness for the sake of these things, or, more generally, on account of anything else. The same thing appears to result also on the basis of self-sufficiency, for the complete good is held to be self-sufficient. We do not mean by self-sufficient what suffices for someone by himself, living a solitary life, but what is sufficient also with respect to parents, offspring, a wife, and, in general, one's friends and fellow citizens, since by nature a human being is political. But it is necessary to grasp a certain limit to these, for if one, the Greek, extends these to include the parents of parents and descendants and the friends of friends, it will go on infinitely. But this must be examined further later on. As for the self-sufficient, we posit it as that which by itself makes life choice-worthy and in need of nothing, and such is what we suppose happiness to be. Further, happiness is the most choice-worthy of all things because it is not just one among them, and it is clear that, were it included as one among many things, it would be more choice-worthy with the least addition of the good things, for the good that is added to it results in a superabundance of goods, and the greater number of goods is always more choice-worthy. So happiness appears to be something complete and self-sufficient, it being an end of our actions. But perhaps saying that happiness is best is something manifestly agreed on, whereas what it is still needs to be said more distinctly. Now, perhaps this would come to pass if the work of the human being should be grasped. For just as in the case of an awless player, sculptor, and every expert, and in general with those who have a certain work and action, the relevant good and the doing of something well seem to reside in the work, so too the same might be held to be the case with a human being, if in fact there is a certain work that is a human being's. Are there, then, certain works and actions of a carpenter and shoemaker, but none of a human being? Would he, by contrast, be naturally without a work? 41. Or just as there appears to be a certain work of the eye, hand, and foot, and in fact of each of the parts in general, so also might one posit a certain work of a human being apart from all these. So whatever, then, would this work be? For living appears to be something common even to plants, but what is peculiar to human beings is being sought. One must set aside, then, the life characterized by nutrition as well as growth. A certain life characterized by sense perception would be next, but it too appears to be common to a horse and cow and in fact to every animal. So there remains a certain active life of that which possesses idle. Book T, Chapter 7, 13 Reason, and what possesses reason includes what is obedient to reason, on the one hand, and what possesses it and thinks, on the other. But since this life of reason in the second sense also is spoken of in a twofold way, one must posit the life of that which possesses reason in accord with an activity, for this seems to be its more authoritative meaning. And if the work of a human being is an activity of soul in accord with reason, or not without reason, and we assert that the work of a given person is the same in kind as that of a serious person, just as it would be in the case of a kithera player and a serious kithera player, and this would be so in all cases simply when the superiority in accord with the virtue is added to the work, for it belongs to a kithera player to play the kithera, but to a serious one to do so well. But if this is so, and we posit the work of a human being as a certain life, and this is an activity of soul and actions accompanied by reason, the work of a serious man being to do these things well and nobly, and each thing is brought to completion well in accord with the virtue proper to it. If this is so, then the human good becomes an activity of soul in accord with virtue, and if there are several virtues, then in accord with the best and most complete one. But, in addition, in a complete life. For one swallow does not make a spring, nor does one day. And in this way, one day or a short time does not make someone blessed and happy either. Let the good have been sketched in this way, then, for perhaps one referent, the life in accord with the part of the soul that possesses reason and thinks, of this part, there is both an activity and a characteristic, hexis, and, as Aristotle will argue in 1, happiness consists in the activity or use rather than the mere possession of a characteristic. Burnet recommends dropping the immediately preceding phrase, which distinguishes the two parts of the soul. He argues that the phrase interrupts the argument and destroys the grammar. On his reading, the referent would be simply the active life of that which possesses reason. Or to outline it first and then fill it in later. It might seem to belong to everyone to advance and fully articulate things whose sketch is in a noble condition, and time is a good discoverer of or contributor to such things. From this have arisen the advances in the arts too, for it belongs to everyone to add what is lacking. But one must remember the points mentioned previously as well, to the effect that one must not seek out precision in all matters alike but rather in each thing in turn as accords with the subject matter in question and insofar as is appropriate to the inquiry. For both carpenter and geometer seek out the right angle but in different ways. The former seeks it insofar as it is useful to his work, the latter seeks out what it is or what sort of a thing it is, for he is one who contemplates the truth. One ought to act in the same manner also in other cases, so that things extraneous to the works involved not multiply. And one should not demand the cause in all things alike either. Rather, it is enough in some cases to have nobly pointed out that such is the case in what concerns the principles and that is the first thing and a principle. Some principles are observed by means of induction, some by perception, some by a certain habituation, and others in other ways. One ought to try to go in search of each in turn in the manner natural to them and to be serious about their being nobly defined. For they are of great weight in what follows from them. The beginning seems to be more than half of the whole, and many of the points being sought seem to become manifest on account of it. Chapter 80. Any must examine what concerns it, not only on the basis of the conclusion and the premises on which the argument rests, but also on the basis of things said about it. For with the truth, all the given facts harmonize, but with what is false, the truth soon hits a wrong note. As contemplation and contemplative theoreticos. 15. Now, although the good things have been distributed in a threefold manner, both those goods said to be external, on the one hand, and those pertaining to soul and to body, on the other, we say that those pertaining to soul are the most authoritative and especially good. And we posit as those goods pertaining to soul, the soul's actions and activities. As a result, the argument would be stated nobly, at least according to this opinion, which is ancient and agreed to by those who philosophize. It would be correct too to say that certain actions and activities are the end, for in this way the end belongs among the goods related to soul, not among the external ones. And that the happy person both lives well and acts well harmonizes with the argument, for happiness was pretty much said to be a certain kind of living well and good action. It also appears that all the things being sought pertaining to happiness are included in what was said. In the opinion of some, happiness is virtue, of others, prudence, of others, a certain wisdom. In the opinion of still others, it is these or some of these things, together with pleasure or not without pleasure. And others include alongside these the prosperity related to external goods as well. Many of the ancients say some of these things, few men of high repute say others of them. And it is reasonable that neither of these two groups be wholly in error, but rather that they be correct in some one respect, at least, or even in most respects. The argument, then, is in harmony with those who say that happiness is virtue or a certain virtue, for the activity in accord with virtue belongs to virtue. But perhaps it makes no small difference whether one supposes the best thing to reside in possession or use, that is, in a characteristic or an activity. For it is possible that, although the characteristic is present, it accomplishes nothing good. For example, in the case of sometimes the main verb is without an expressed subject, we follow the suggestion of Binet and assume logos, here rendered as argument, although definition of happiness is another possibility. Good action, or faring well. Eupraxia, the abstract noun here used, is related to the word translated as action throughout, praxis, and the previous terms in the sentence, acts well, eupratin, can also be translated as fares well, seen. 17. Virtues. One who is asleep or has been otherwise hindered. But this is not possible when it comes to the activity. Of necessity, a person will act, and he will act well. For just as it is not the noblest and strongest who are crowned with the victory wreath in the Olympic Games, but rather the competitors, for it is certain of these who win, so also it is those who act correctly who attain the noble and good things in life. But their life is also pleasant in itself, for feeling pleasure is among the things related to the soul, and there is pleasure for each person in connection with whatever he is said to be a lover of. For example, a horse is pleasant to the horse lover, a play to the theatre lover. In the same manner too, the just things are pleasant to the lover of justice, and in general, things in accord with virtue are pleasant to the lover of virtue. Now, things pleasant to the many do battle with one another, because such things are not pleasant by nature, but to the lovers of what is noble, the things pleasant by nature are pleasant. Such too are the actions in accord with virtue, with the result that they are pleasant both to such people and in themselves. Indeed, the life of those who love what is noble has no need of additional pleasure, like a sort of added charm, but possesses pleasure in itself. For, in addition to the points mentioned, he who takes no delight in noble actions is not good either. For no one would say that somebody who does not delight in acting justly is just, or who does not delight in liberal actions is liberal, and similarly in the other cases as well. And if this is so, then the actions in accord with virtue would, in themselves, be pleasant. But certainly these actions are good as well as noble. 55. And they will be each of these especially, if in fact the serious person judges nobly about them, and he judges as we said. Happiness, therefore, is the best, noblest, and most pleasant thing, and these are not separated, as the inscription at Delos has it, noblest is what is most just, but best is to be healthy, and most pleasant by nature is for someone to attain what he passionately desires. For all these are present in the best activities, and we assert that happiness is these activities or the best one among them. Nonetheless, it manifestly requires external goods in addition, just 17 as we said. For it is impossible or not easy for someone without equipment to do what is noble. Many things are done through instruments, as it were through friends, wealth, and political power. Those who are bereft of some of these, for example, good birth, good children, or beauty, disfigure their blessedness, for a person who is altogether ugly in appearance, or of poor birth, or solitary and childless cannot really be characterized as happy, and he is perhaps still less happy if he should have altogether bad children or friends, or, though he did have good ones, they are dead. Just as we said, then, happiness seems to require some such external prosperity in addition. This is why some make good fortune equivalent to happiness, and others, virtue. Chapter 9. This is also why the perplexity arises as to whether happiness is something that can be gained through learning or habituation or through some other practice, or whether it comes to be present in accord with a sort of divine allotment or even through chance. Now, if there is in fact anything that is a gift of the gods to human beings, it is reasonable that happiness is God-given, and it is especially among the human concerns insofar as it is the best of them. But perhaps this would be more appropriate to another examination. Yet it appears that even if happiness is not God-sent but comes to be present through virtue and a certain learning or practice, it is among the most divine things. For the prize of virtue or its end appears to be best and to be something divine and blessed. It would also be something common to many people, for it is possible for it to be available, through a certain learning and care, to all who have not been rendered defective in point of virtue. And if it is better to be happy in this way rather than through chance, it is reasonable that this is how happiness is acquired, if in fact what accords with nature is naturally in the noblest possible state, and similar to is what accords being successful or enjoying good luck. The same word appears also at RR 78b times with art and with cause as a whole, and especially the best, art or cause. To entrust the greatest and noblest thing to chance would be excessively discordant. What is being sought is manifest also on the basis of the argument, or definition, for happiness was said to be a certain sort of activity of soul in accord with virtue. Now, of the remaining goods, some must necessarily be present, others are co-workers and by nature useful in an instrumental way. And these points would be in agreement also with those made at the beginning. We posited the end of the political art as best, and it exercises a very great care to make the citizens of a specific sort, namely, good and apt to do the noble things. It is to be expected, then, that we do not say that either a cow or a horse or any other animal is at all happy, for none of them are able to share in such an activity. It is because of this too that a child is not happy either. He is not yet apt to do such things, on account of his age, though some children are spoken of as blessed on account of the expectation involved in their case. For, as we said, both complete virtue and a complete life are required. Many reversals and all manner of fortune arise in the course of life, and it is possible for someone who is particularly thriving to encounter great disasters in old age, just as the myth is told about Priam in the Trojan tales. Nobody deems happy someone who deals with fortunes of that sort and comes to a wretched end. Chapter 10 Should one, then, not deem happy any human being for so long as he is alive, but must one look instead, as Solon has it, to his end? But if indeed it is necessary to posit such a thesis, then is in fact a person happy when he is dead? Or is this, at least, altogether strange, especially for us who say that happiness is a certain activity? But if we do not say that the dead person is happy, and this is not what Solon means either, but say rather that someone might safely deem a human being blessed only once he is already at a remove from bad things and misfortunes, this too admits, 19, of some dispute. For it is held that both something bad and something good can befall the dead person, if in fact they can befall the living person who does not perceive it, for example, honors and dishonors, and the faring well, or the misfortunes of his offspring and descendants generally. But these things too are perplexing, for someone who has lived blessedly until old age and come to his end accordingly, it is possible that many reversals may occur involving his descendants, just as some of these descendants may be good and attain the life that accords with their merit, but others the contrary. Yet it is clear that it is possible for these descendants to be of varying degrees of remove from their ancestors. Indeed, it would be strange if even the dead person should share in reversals and become now happy, now wretched again. But it would be strange too if nothing of the affairs of the descendants should reach the ancestors, not even for a certain time. But one must return to the perplexity previously mentioned, for perhaps what is now being sought might also be contemplated on the basis of it. If indeed one does have to see a person's end and at that time deem each person blessed, not as being blessed now, but as having been such previously, how is this not strange if, when he is happy, what belongs to him will not be truly attributed to him? This strange consequence arises, on account of our wish not to call the living happy, given the reversals that may happen, and of our supposition that happiness is something lasting and by no means easily subject to reversals, while fortunes often revolve for the same people. For it is clear that if we should follow someone's fortunes, we will often say that the same person is happy and then again wretched, declaring that the happy person is a sort of chameleon and on unsound footing. Or is it not at all correct to follow someone's fortunes? For it is not in these that doing well or badly consists. Rather, human life requires these fortunes in addition, just as we said, yet it is the activities in accord with virtue that have authoritative control over happiness, and the contrary activities over the contrary. The perplexity just now raised also bears witness to the argument, since in none of the human works is anything so secure as what pertains to the activities that accord with virtue. For such activities seem to be more lasting than even the sciences, and the most honored of them seem to be more lasting, because those who are blessed live out their lives 63 times literally, in accord with reason, logos, 35 110 abgaged, to the greatest degree and most continuously, in these activities. This seems to be the cause of our not forgetting such activities. Indeed, what is being sought will be available to the happy person, and he will be such throughout life. For he will always almost of all act on and contemplate what accords with virtue, and he, at least he who is truly good and, foursquare, without blame, 64, he will bear fortunes altogether nobly and suitably in every way. Now, many things occur by chance, and they differ in how great or small they are. The small instances of good fortune, and similarly of its opposite, clearly do not tip the balance of one's life, whereas the great and numerous ones that occur will make life more blessed, since these naturally help adorn life, and dealing with them is noble and serious. But those fortunes that turn out in the contrary way restrict and even ruin one's blessedness, for they both inflict pains and impede many activities. Nevertheless, even in the midst of these, nobility shines through, whenever someone bears up calmly under many great misfortunes, not because of any insensitivity to pain but because he is well born and great-souled. And if the activities have authoritative control over life, just as we said, then no one who is blessed would become wretched, since he will never do things that are hateful and base. For we suppose that someone who is truly good and sensible bears up under all fortunes in a becoming way and always does what is noblest given the circumstances, just as a good general makes use, with the greatest military skill, of the army he has, and a shoemaker makes the most beautiful shoe out of the leather given him. It holds in the same manner with all the other experts as well. And if this is so, the happy person would never become wretched, nor indeed would he be blessed, it is true, if he encounters the fortunes of Priam. He would not be unstable and subject to reversals either, for he will not be easily moved from happiness, and then not by any random misfortunes but only by great and numerous ones. And as a result of such things he would not become happy again in a short time, but if in fact he does, he will do so in the completion of some lengthy time during which he comes to attain great and noble things. What, then, prevents one from calling happy someone who is active in accord with complete virtue and who is adequately equipped with extra 64 times from Simonides, a lyric and elegiac poet, ca. 556 to 468. See also Plato Protagoras 339b, where parts of the poem from which this line is taken are quoted and discussed. Psyche, which Aristotle will analyze at 4 times 3 times now goods, not for any chance time but in a complete life. Or must one posit in addition that he will both live in this way and meet his end accordingly, since the future is immanifest to us, and we posit happiness, wholly and in every way, as an end and as complete? And if this is so, we will say that those among the living who have and will have available to them the things stated are blessed, but blessed human beings. Let what pertains to these things too be defined up to this point. Chapter 11. But that the fortunes of a person's descendants and all his friends contribute nothing whatsoever to his happiness, appears to be excessively opposed to what is dear 67 and contrary to the opinions held. And because the things that may befall us are many and differ in various respects, some hitting closer to home, other less so, thoroughly distinguishing each appears to be a long and even endless task. But perhaps for the matter to be stated generally and in outline would be adequate. Just as some of the misfortunes that concern a person himself have a certain gravity and weight as regards his life, but others seem lighter, so also the misfortunes that concern all his friends are similar, and if, concerning each thing suffered, it makes a difference whether the friends are alive or have met their end, far more than if the unlawful and terrible things in tragic plays occur before the action of the play or during it, then one must indeed take this difference into account, and even more, perhaps, when it comes to the perplexity raised concerning those who have passed away, that is, whether they share in something good or in the opposite. For it seems, on the basis of these points, that even if anything at all does get through to them, whether good or its contrary, it is something faint and small, either simply so or to them. And if this is not so, then what gets through to them is, at any rate, of such a degree and kind that it does not make happy those who are not such or deprive those who are happy of their blessedness. The friends faring well, then, appears to make some contribution to the condition of those who have passed away, as does, similarly, their faring ill, but a contribution of such a kind and degree as not to make the happy unhappy or anything else of that sort. Eddy, that can be applied either to the sick or to the dead. Top BTB Chapter 12 3511 With these things defined, let us examine closely whether happiness is something praised or rather honored, for it is clear that it does not belong among the capacities, at any rate. Now, everything praised appears to be praised for its being of a certain sort and for its condition relative to something. We praise the just person, the courageous person, and, in general, the good person as well as virtue itself, on account of the actions and works involved, and we praise the strong man and the swift runner and each of the rest for their being, by nature, of a certain sort and for their condition in relation to something good and serious. This is clear also on the basis of the praises offered to the gods, since it is manifestly laughable for them to be compared to us, but this happens because praise arises through comparison, as we said. And if praise is of things of that sort, it is clear that not praise but something greater and better than praise applies to the best things, as in fact appears to be the case. The gods we deem blessed and happy, and the most divine of men we deem blessed. The case is similar with the good things too. None praise happiness the way they praise justice. Rather, people deem happiness a blessed thing, on the grounds that it is something more divine and better. And Eudoxus too seems to have nobly pleaded his case that the first prize belongs to pleasure. For the fact that it is not praised as being among the good things reveals, he supposed, that it is superior to the things praised, and such, he supposed, is the God and the good. For it is to these that all else is compared. Indeed, praise belongs to virtue. People are apt to do noble things as a result of virtue, whereas encomiums belong to the works of both body and soul alike. But perhaps being very precise about these things is more appropriate to those who have labored over encomiums. To us it has been said, happiness belongs among the things that are honored and complete. This seems to be the case also on account of its being a principle. It is for the sake of this that we all do everything else, and we posit the principle and the cause of the good things as being something honorable and divine. Of Sue's Mill deletes the final verb such that the amended text would read in translation, "We deem blessed and happy the gods as well as the most divine of men." 23 Chapter 13 Now, since happiness is a certain activity of soul in accord with complete virtue, what concerns virtue would have to be examined. For perhaps in this way we might better contemplate happiness as well. And the politician in the true sense seems to have labored over this especially, for he wishes to make the citizens good and obedient to the laws. We have as models of these the lawgivers of the Cretans and Lacedaemonians, and any others of that sort there might have been. And if this examination is a part of the political art, it is clear that the investigation would be in accord with the choice made at the beginning. But that we must examine the virtue distinctive of a human being is clear, for we were seeking both the human good and human happiness. We mean by virtue distinctive of a human being, not that of the body but that of the soul, and by happiness, we mean an activity of soul. But if these things are so, then it is clear that the politician ought to know in some way about the soul, just as also someone who is going to treat the eye must know the whole body as well, and even more so inasmuch as the political art is more honorable and better than medicine. Those physicians who are refined take very seriously what pertains to knowledge of the body, and the politician too ought to contemplate the soul, but he ought to contemplate it for the sake of these things and up to the point that is adequate for what is being sought. To be more precise is perhaps too difficult given the tasks set forth. But some points concerning the soul are stated sufficiently even in the exoteric arguments, and one ought to make use of them. For example, that one part of it is non-rational, another possesses reason. Yet whether these things are divided, like the parts of the body and every divisible thing, or whether they are two in speech but naturally inseparable, like the convex and the concave in the circumference of a circle, makes no difference with a view to the present task. Of the non-rational, one part seems to be that which is held in common and vegetative mean that which causes nutrition and growth. For someone could posit that such a capacity of the soul is in all things that are nourished and in embryos, and that this same capacity is present in the completed things as well, for this is more rational than positing evidently a reference to writings intended for a wider or more popular audience. See also N. 26. 11. Of some other capacity. A certain virtue belonging to this capacity, then, appears to be common and not distinctive of a human being. For this part and its capacity seem particularly active in sleep, but the good person and the bad would be least distinct in sleep. So it is that people assert that for half of life, the happy do not differ at all from the wretched, and this is to be expected. Sleep is an idleness of that in reference to which the soul is said to be serious or base. Unless, that is, certain motions do reach them to a small degree, and in this way the dreams of the decent are better than those of people at random. But enough about these things, let the nutritive part be, since it does not naturally share in human virtue. Yet there seems to be also a certain other nature of the soul that is non-rational, although it does share in reason in a way. For in the case of the self-restrained person and of the one lacking self-restraint, we praise their reason and that part of their soul possessing reason, since it correctly exhorts them toward the best things. But there appears to be something else in them that is by nature contrary to reason, which does battle with and strains against reason. For just as when we choose to move paralyzed parts of the body to the right and they are, to the contrary, borne off to the left, so also with the soul, the impulses of those lacking self-restraint are toward things contrary to their reason. Yet whereas in the case of bodies, we see the thing being borne off, in the case of the soul we do not see it. But perhaps one must hold there to be, no less in the case of the soul too, something contrary to reason that opposes and blocks it. How it is different does not matter at all, it too appears to share in reason, as we said. In the case of the self-restrained person, at any rate, it is obedient to the commands of reason and perhaps it heeds those commands still more readily in the case of the moderate or courageous person, since then it is in all respects in harmony with reason. It appears, therefore, that the non-rational part is twofold, for the vegetative part has nothing in common with reason, but that part characterized by desire, and by longing in general, shares somehow in reason inasmuch as it heeds it and is apt to be obedient to its commands. Thus we assert that, he who is in this way obedient to the commands of his father and friends in some manner possesses reason, and not that he does so in the manner of someone knowledgeable in mathematics. That the non-rational part is somehow persuaded by reason is indicated both by discussion of justice and equity in 5. Admonition and by all criticism as well as exhortation. But if we must assert that this part too possesses reason, then that which possesses reason will be twofold as well. What possesses it in the authoritative sense and in itself, on the one hand, and, on the other, what has it in the sense of being apt to listen as one does to one's father. Virtue too is defined in accord with this distinction, for we say that some of the virtues are intellectual, others moral, 73 wisdom, comprehension, and prudence being intellectual, liberality and moderation being moral. For in speaking about someone's character, we do not say that he is wise or comprehending, but that he is gentle or moderate. Yet we praise the wise person too with respect to the characteristic that is his, and we say that of the characteristics, the praiseworthy ones are virtues. Book Chapter 1 Virtue, then, is twofold, intellectual and moral. Both the coming into being and increase of intellectual virtue result mostly from teaching, hence it requires experience and time, whereas moral virtue is the result of habit, and so it is that moral virtue got its name, ethic, by a slight alteration of the term habit, ethos. It is also clear, as a result, that none of the moral virtues are present in us by nature, since nothing that exists by nature is habituated to be other than it is. For example, a stone, because it is borne downward by nature, could not be habituated to be borne upward, not even if someone habituates it by throwing it upward 10,000 times. Fire too could not be borne downward, nor could anything else that is naturally one way be habituated to be another. Neither by nature, therefore, nor contrary to nature are the virtues present, they are instead present in us who are of such a nature as to receive them, and who are completed through habit. Further, in the case of those things present in us by nature, we are first provided with the capacities associated with them, then later on display the activities, something that is in fact clear in the case of sense perceptions. For it is not as a result of seeing many times or hearing many times that we came to have those sense perceptions, rather, it is, conversely, because we have them that we use them, and not because we use them that we have them. But the virtues we come to have by engaging in the activities first, as is the case with the arts as well. For as regards those things we must learn how to do, we learn by doing them. For example, by building houses, people become house builders, and by being the middle rather than the passive voice, and who complete or perfect themselves through habit. 27 Playing the kithara, they become kithara players. So too, then, by doing just things we become just, moderate things, moderate, and courageous things, courageous. What happens in the cities too bears witness to this, for by habituating citizens, lawgivers make them good, and this is the wish of every lawgiver. All who do not do this well are in error, and it is in this respect that a good regime differs from a base regime. Further, as a result of and on account of the same things, every virtue both comes into being and is destroyed, as is similarly the case also with an art. For it is as a result of playing the kithara that both good and bad kithara players arise, and analogously with house builders and all the rest, as a result of building houses well, people will be good house builders, but as a result of doing so badly, they will be bad ones. If this were not the case, there would be no need of a teacher, but everyone would come into being already good or bad. So too in the case of the virtues, by doing things in our interactions with human beings, some of us become just, others unjust, and by doing things in terrifying circumstances and by being habituated to feel fear or confidence, some of us become courageous, others cowards. The case is similar as regards desires and bouts of anger. For some people become moderate and gentle, others licentious and irascible, the former as a result of conducting themselves in the one way, the latter as a result of doing so in the other. And so, in a word, the characteristics come into being as a result of the activities akin to them. Hence we must make our activities be of a certain quality, for the characteristics correspond to the differences among the activities. It makes no small difference, then, whether one is habituated in this or that way straight from childhood, but a very great difference, or rather the whole difference. Chapter TWO. Now, since the present subject is taken up, not for the sake of contemplation, as our others forway are conducting an examination, not so that we may know what virtue is, but so that we may become good, since otherwise there would be no benefit from it. It is necessary to examine matters pertaining to actions, that is, how one ought to perform them. For these actions have authoritative control over what sorts of characteristics come into being, just as we have said. Now, acting in accord with correct reason, for is commonly granted, and let it be posited for now what pertains to it will be spoken of later, both what correct reason is and how it relates to the virtues. But let it be agreed to in advance that every argument concerned with what ought to be done is bound to be stated in outline only and not precisely, just as we said at the beginning as well, that the demands made of given arguments should accord with the subject matter in question. Matters of action and those pertaining to what is advantageous have nothing stationary about them, just as matters of health do not either. And since such is the character of the general argument, still less precise is the argument concerned with particulars, for it does not fall under an art or any set of precepts. Instead, those who act ought themselves always to examine what pertains to the opportune moment, when it presents itself, as is the case with both medicine and piloting. Although such is the character of the present argument, one must nonetheless attempt to be of assistance. This, then, is the first thing that must be contemplated. Such things, as the virtues, are naturally destroyed through deficiency and excess, just as we see in the case of strength and health. For one ought to make use of manifest things as witnesses on behalf of what is immanifest. Excessive as well as deficient gymnastic exercises destroy strength, and, similarly, both drink and food destroy health as they increase or decrease in quantity, whereas the proportionate amounts create, increase, and preserve health. So it is too with moderation, courage, and the other virtues. He who avoids and fears all things and endures nothing becomes a coward, and he who generally fears nothing but advances toward all things becomes reckless. Similarly, he who enjoys every pleasure and abstains from none becomes licentious, but he who avoids every pleasure, as the boorish do, is a sort of insensible person. Moderation and courage are this famous phrase, orthos logos, which translators have often rendered as right reason, is as ambiguous as its components. What is correct, orthos, may or may not be true, and a logos may be a rational argument or merely a speech, rational or not. Indeed destroyed by excess and deficiency, but they are preserved by the mean. But not only do the coming into being and increase of the virtues, as well as their destruction, occur as a result of the same things and through the same things, but the activities associated with the virtues, too, will be found in the same things, as are responsible for their coming into being and increase. For this is the case also with other, more manifest things. For example, in the case of strength, it comes into being as a result of taking much nourishment and enduring many exertions, and he who is strong would especially be able to do just these things. So too in the case of the virtues, for as a result of abstaining from pleasures, we become moderate, and by so becoming, we are especially able to abstain from them. Similar is the case of courage as well. By being habituated to disdain frightening things and to endure them, we become courageous, and by so becoming, we will be especially able to endure frightening things. Chapter 3 The pleasure or pain that accompanies someone's deeds ought to be taken as a sign of his characteristics. He who abstains from bodily pleasures and enjoys this very abstention is moderate, but he who is vexed in doing so is licentious. He who endures terrifying things and enjoys doing so, or at any rate is not pained by it, is courageous, but he who is pained thereby is a coward. For moral virtue is concerned with pleasures and pains. It is on account of the pleasure involved that we do base things, and it is on account of the pain that we abstain from noble ones. Thus one must be brought up in a certain way straight from childhood, as Plato asserts, so as to enjoy as well as to be pained by what one ought, for this is correct education. Further, if the virtues are concerned with actions and passions, and pleasure and pain accompany every passion and every action, then on this account too virtue would be concerned with pleasures and pains. Punishments are indicative of this as well, since they arise through these pains. They are a sort of curative treatment, and curative treatments naturally take place through contraries. Further, as we said just recently too, every characteristic of soul shows its nature in relation to and in its concern for the sorts of things by which moral phenomena, whether it naturally becomes worse or better. It is through pleasures and pains that people become base, by pursuing and avoiding these, either the pleasures and pains that one ought not to pursue or avoid, or when one ought not, or as one ought not, or in as many other such conditions as are defined by reason. Thus people even define the virtues as certain dispassionate and calm states, though such a definition is not good, for they say simply this much but not, as one ought not, when, and any other things posited in addition. Virtue, therefore, has been posited as being such as to produce the best actions, in relation to pleasures and pains, and vice as being the contrary. But that virtue and vice are concerned with the same things might become manifest to us also from these considerations, there being three objects of choice and three of avoidance: the noble, the advantageous, and the pleasant, together with their three contraries, the shameful, the harmful, and the painful. In all these the good person is apt to be correct, the bad person to err, but especially as regards pleasure. For pleasure is common to the animals and attendant upon all things done through choice, since both what is noble and what is advantageous appear pleasant. Further, pleasure has been a part of the upbringing of us all from infancy. It is difficult to remove this experience, since our life has been so ingrained with it. We also take pleasure and pain as the rule of our actions, some of us to a greater degree, some to a lesser. It is on account of this, then, that one's entire concern necessarily pertains to pleasure and pain, for taking delight and feeling pain make no small contribution to our actions being well or badly done. Further, it is more difficult to battle against pleasure than against spiritedness, as Heraclitus asserts, and art and virtue always arise in connection with that which is more difficult. The doing of something well is better when it is more difficult. As a result, and on account of this, the whole also above. Matter of concern in both virtue and the political art is bound up with pleasures and pains. For he who deals with these well will be good, but he who does so badly will be bad. Let it be said, then, that virtue concerns pleasures and pains, that it both increases as a result of those actions from which it comes into being and is destroyed when these are performed in a different manner, and that it becomes active in just those activities as a result of which it also came into being. Chapter 4. But someone might be perplexed as to what we mean when we say that to become just, people must do just things, or, to become moderate, do moderate things. For if they do just and moderate things, they already are just and moderate, just as if they do what concerns letters and music, they are by that fact skilled, or artful, in letters and in music. Or is this not so even in the case of the arts? For it is possible to do something skillful in letters by chance or on the instructions of another. A person will actually be skilled in letters, then, when he both does something skillful and does it in a skillful way, and this is what accords with the art of letters that resides within the person himself. Further, what pertains in the arts is not at all similar to what pertains in the virtues. For the excellence in whatever comes into being through the arts resides in the artifacts themselves. It is enough, then, for these artifacts to be in a certain state. But whatever deeds arise in accord with the virtues are not done justly or moderately if they are merely in a certain state, but only if he who does those deeds is in a certain state as well. First, if he acts knowingly. Second, if he acts by choosing and by choosing the actions in question for their own sake. And, third, if he acts while being in a steady and unwavering state. But these criteria are irrelevant when it comes to possessing the arts except for the knowledge itself involved. But when it comes to the virtues, knowledge has no, or little, force, whereas the other two criteria amount to not a small part of but rather the whole affair, criteria that are in fact met as a result of our doing just and moderate things many times. Matters of action are said to 110 be just and moderate, then, when they are comparable in kind to what the just or moderate person would do. And yet he who performs these actions is not by that fact alone just and moderate, but only if he also acts as those who are just and moderate act. It is well said, then, that as a result of doing just things, the just person comes into being, and as a result of doing moderate things, the moderate person, without performing these actions, nobody would become good. Yet most people, or the many, do not do them, and, seeking refuge in argument, they suppose that they are philosophizing and that they will in this way be serious, thereby doing something similar to the sick who listen attentively to their physicians but do nothing prescribed. Just as these latter, then, will not have a body in good condition by caring for it in this way, so too the former will not have a soul in good condition by philosophizing in this way. Chapter 5. After this, what virtue is must be examined. Now, since there are three things that are present in the soul: passions, capacities, and characteristics, virtue would be one of these. I mean by passions the following: desire, anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, friendly affection, hatred, yearning, emulation, pity in general, those things that pleasure or pain accompany. And capacities are those things in reference to which we are said to be able to undergo these passions, for example, those in reference to which we are able to feel anger, pain, or pity. But characteristics are those things in reference to which we are in a good or bad state in relation to the passions. For example, if we feel anger intensely or weakly, we are in a bad condition, but if in a measured way, we are in a good condition, and similarly with the other passions as well. Neither the virtues nor the vices, then, are passions, because we are not said to be serious or base in reference to the passions but in reference to the virtues and vices, and because we are neither praised nor blamed in reference to the passions simply, for neither he who is afraid nor he who is angry is praised, or friendship. Although Aristotle uses exactly the same word, philia, for both the moral virtue taken up in 4 and the association of two friends discussed in books 8 to 9, he argues that the former does not really have a name, though it seems most like friendship, and that the latter is finally something other than moral virtue. Nor is he who is simply angry blamed, but only he who is such in a certain way. Rather, it is in reference to the virtues and vices that we are praised or blamed. Further, we are angry and afraid in the absence of choice, but the virtues are certain choices or not without choice. In addition to these considerations, in the case of the passions we are said to be moved, but in that of the virtues and vices, we are not said to be moved but rather to have a certain disposition. On account of these considerations as well, the virtues and vices are not capacities either. For we are not said to be either good or bad by dint of possessing the capacity simply to undergo the passions, nor are we praised or blamed. Further, we are possessed of capacities by nature, but we do not by nature become good or bad. But we spoke about this before. If, then, the virtues are neither passions nor capacities, it remains that they are characteristics. What virtue is with respect to its genus, then, has been said. 1108 Chapter 6 Yet one ought to say not only this that virtue is a characteristic but also what sort of characteristic it is. So it must be stated that every virtue both brings that of which it is the virtue into a good condition and causes the work belonging to that thing to be done well. For example, the virtue of the eye makes both the eye and its work excellent, for by means of the virtue of the eye, we see well. Similarly, the virtue of a horse makes the horse both excellent and good when it comes to running, and carrying its rider, and standing its ground before enemies. If indeed this is so in all cases, then the virtue of a human being too would be that characteristic as a result of which a human being becomes good and as a result of which he causes his own work to be done well. And how this will be, we have already stated. But virtue will be further manifest also as follows. I will contemplate what sort of thing its nature is. In everything continuous and divisible, it is possible to grasp the more, the less, and the equal, and these either in reference to the thing itself or in relation to us. The equal is also a certain middle term between excess and deficiency. I mean by a middle term of something, as distinguished from he mesotes, which will always be rendered as the mean. The two are etymologically close. Of the thing, that which stands at an equal remove from each of the extremes, which is in fact one and the same thing for all, though in relation to us, it is that which neither takes too much nor is deficient. But this is not one thing, nor is it the same for all. For example, if 10 is much but 2 is few, 6 is a middle term for those who take it in reference to the thing itself, for it both exceeds and is exceeded by an equal amount, and this is the middle term according to the arithmetic proportion. But one ought not to grasp in this way the middle term relative to us, for if eating 10 pounds is a lot but 2 pounds too little, the trainer will not prescribe 6 pounds.